Privacy by voice. So we're looking at privacy notices primarily for the voice interface here, right? So what kind of design choices should we consider? Which ones do users really prefer here in this context? Now, why are we looking at voice interface? Because voice interfaces slowly become one of the most dominant interfaces that users are now interacting with. It starts off with the most common device, that's the smart assistants that you have. And it turns out if you look at some recent stats, you'll see that almost 62% of US adults have purchased some form of voice assistance in their home. And the voice assistant ecosystem is also growing in this context, especially by Alexa, who not only just have the voice assistant as a kind of a single silo device, but it's also opening up to third parties, where third parties can now develop applications on top of it, right? And so there's tons of third-party applications in the context of Alexa. These are called skills that are currently available in the market, right? And even more, a lot of these voice systems are now being integrated with various other devices, such as cars and appliances, right? So, in some sense, the uses of voice interfaces is increasing day by day, and so that's why we wanted to look into this issue, into this concept of how to notify users of their choice in this interface, right? Now, if you look at it, as I just said, mentioned here, a lot of the times these interfaces will request data. And primarily, a lot of this data request will happen through the voice interface, which is typically a little bit different than what you use in your smartphone. For example, if you install an app, you get a permission. You can see the permission list and approve or disapprove, right? But in the context of voice assistants, a lot of the times, these data requests happen through the verbal interface itself. And there's basically sometimes not enough choices and controls in these interfaces, right? So here's one kind of a quotation from one of the participants that we had, like, is not permission, but basically one example of a third-party skill that asks for your age before it can start giving you some activities, right? But there's no intent of whether that information should be allowed or not from the user's perspective itself. Now, as I said, people have grown used to looking at privacy notices primarily on the visual interface. As I said, I talked about apps in the web. You have cookies options and cookie banners, right? So, but in the context of voice assistants, there isn't any kind of notice through the voice modality itself, right? And so that's what we were trying to look into and see if this can be a useful thing for users to have. So in this context, we set out for 3 high-level research questions. So the first research question was looking into what privacy features do users want when they're interacting with this kind of a voice interface, especially in the context of data requests through the voice interface. What design factors should we consider while we're designing some notices for the voice interface itself, right? And third one, once we've identified the factors, we went ahead and tried to see and prototype some of those designs and see which ones users tend to kind of prefer most, right? And we'll see that this is kind of an exploration study where we designed numerous prototypes and highlighted the ones that the users most preferred. So to answer those questions, we ran two-phase user study. In the first phase, we basically interviewed active voice assistant users. So we recruited them through various online social media and Reddit groups. But the recruitment process was very rigorous in the sense that they not only had to agree, but they had to go into an online Zoom session to show that they had the voice assistant with them, so that we know that they're actually users of it. And so the first study basically gave us insights about what factors they want, or when do they want preferences and what factors matter. And in the second study, we kind of did that exploration study where we did the prototypes, and we basically did a within subject study where we gathered users from Prolific and asked them to interact with all the different design choices that we had. So from the first study, the main factors that came out, there was 5 main factors that users cared about. One was context, which basically tells the context in which the data is being requested. So for example, if you're executing an application that is that suggests some workout, they may need some information about your age or weight and something. So there is relevant information that may be needed for that functionality. So we're calling that as relevant data requests. And then in some cases, you may have applications that are requesting some information that doesn't have a direct connection with the functionality that they're serving, right? So which we are calling as irrelevant. Then you have control. Control is in the context of whether you're going to be blocking that request before the application can start using that data, or is it going to be non-blocking in the sense that you're going to let the application run and make a decision later on. And modality, meaning that is the notice going to be rendered only through audio? In some cases, users may say that, okay, I don't have time to listen to the audio, also send me something in the app itself. So we also had that in case some users wanted that. Timing, meaning that do you want the notification before the data request or after the data request has gone through, right? So that's another factor. And the voice was an interesting factor where we wanted to see if the tone of the voice that the Alexa uses for data requests should be different than the default voice itself, right? And so that's the 5 different modalities that came out of that study 1. And so in study 2, we basically use these factors to design the prototypes, right? So if you think about the 5 factors with 2 different values, there's a combination of 32 possible design choices we could have had. We had to narrow down to only 20 design because some of the combinations didn't make sense. So then we had 20 different variants here. We prototyped a third-party skill, which basically emulates the task to do. So basically, you can list different tasks that you want to do. So this would be the application that we'd be developing. And we had 20 variants based on the relevancy and irrelevancy of the data request itself and the other factors. And as I said, we requested people from Prolific to interact with all those different prototypes, but any given participants would always be interacting with variants within either the relevant design choices or the irrelevant designs. We didn't want to go across that because that would make it complicated for users to remember whether that data request was relevant or non-relevant, right? So this is kind of a within subject design choice itself. And so we did different kind of statistical analysis once we had the data. And so we're listing 2 different statistical methods that we had applied. Now, in terms of the study design 2, once we ran those prototypes and got feedback from the users, we ran the statistical analysis. It turned out that the voice and timing was the predominant factors in designing those privacy notices, right? And you can see the p-vectors from all of those analysis. Now, there is some differences on those 2 factors itself based on whether the data is relevant or irrelevant. So in the context of relevant data, the other choices were that they wanted the data before the data was requested, and they wanted the notice to be non-blocking, meaning that let the application go, but just inform me why the data was being used, right? In the context of irrelevant, they didn't want the data to be transmitted to the third party until the user has made a choice, for example, right? So that was the basic differences from the context. And again, we have the statistical metrics here. Now, in terms of based on those findings, we do make some suggestions. We do make some suggestions to both the platform owners and the developers. So the platform owners, and the nice thing about Alexa is that whenever you deploy a third-party application, you have to register with them, right? And while Alexa doesn't own the backend code that you use, but you do have to register data intents, meaning that what kind of data do you intend to request through your skills, right? And so the platform is in a position to make some of those choices based on whether the data intent is relevant or non-relevant, and can potentially inject some of those privacy notices within their infrastructure itself and not depend on the third party. So that's something that we think is doable. Obviously, what most of our participants did not want to change the tone of the voices from how it normally talks versus when it's requesting data. So they wanted the default voice. A lot of the people got spooked if they were seeing a different voice within their interaction. So we recommend using the default voice. And we also propose that you should have a data dashboard somewhere in your account to at least summarize what kind of data request has been requested or has been granted with the different interactions of the applications that you've interacted with, right? And this is, again, it's doable from the platform because they have the data intents from the different applications. So they can easily summarize that. From the developer perspective, again, don't switch voice. Even if there's an option, you can. But most users don't want that. Have interactive notices, especially for data requests that you think is needed based on the expectations and preferences that the users told us. And also data minimization. So don't request data unless you really need it for your functionality, right? So which is a kind of a common suggestions across different other ecosystems too. So with that, summarize what we've done. So we did see that voices interfaces do have their unique needs in the sense that users have grown used to visual display of notices, not through voice. But a lot of the time, the data request is happening through voice. They don't go through the permission model. So we do need some kind of a notification system in that context. Timing and the voice format, the default format, seems to be the most dominant factors in designing those. And as I said, it should be interactive in the sense that you should interact with the users before requesting those data. And with that, we do have our data for the various user studies that we did available. So if you're interested in looking into that data is also available. With that, I'll stop here, and I'll be happy to receive questions in the next session.
Thank you, Anupam. Yep.